Okay, here's our second video. We're going to follow up on that quiz that we took. The quiz that looks like this, the Power Systems quiz, the day one quiz. And let's go through and see what kind of answers we can come up with on this. And let's just go through them one by one, and we'll talk a little bit about some of it as we go through. I think we'll find it. I think it's interesting. Now, when we go through this, some of these things I know are right, but so a lot of this stuff changes quickly. There's a dynamic to this, so I've tried to keep it current as best I can. But let's go through this and see what we come up with. All right, so it says of the 10 largest in terms of capacity, that means capability of power production. How much power can they produce if they're generating at their full capacity? How many power plants, of in the world are coal? Of the top 10, of the 10 largest, which are coal? Well, the answer to that is 0. Okay. And then the second question, how many are solar? How many of the 10 largest power plants in the world are solar? 0. How many of the 10 largest power plants in the world are wind generation? Again, the answer is 0. Question 4, how many of the 10 largest power plants are nuclear? Well, there actually is one. It's in China, and we'll keep hearing that reoccurring theme through this course this semester. China. Now, of the 10 largest power plants in the world, how many are hydroelectric? Now, classically, when we think about hydroelectric, we think about Hoover Dam, right? But of the 10 largest power plants in the world, 9 of them are hydroelectric. So hydroelectric, and we'll look at hydro in a lot of detail later, but it was sort of the first alternative energy type power generation, wasn't it? I mean, if you lived in an area that you could get away with, so to speak, flooding thousands and thousands and sometimes millions of acres, then you could utilize this backed up water to generate electricity. And in the United States, most of that available hydropower, of the largest variety is pretty much done. And when we look at percentage of power generation, we'll see that it's steady, and it's been steady for years, but it's hard to look at, especially in the United States, any real growth in that area, because can you imagine the regulatory and the politics and the environmental and all these other considerations that would come up to try to recreate a Hoover Dam today? It just, politics aside, whether you're this way or that way, bottom line is it just wouldn't happen. And so anyway, those major power plants are pretty much established. All right, and then the next thing here, it says, how many power plants are there in the world greater than a megawatt? Okay, so one thing in this class we want to get used to, some of these terms out there like, megawatt. Is that a lot of electricity? How does that compare to other things when I think about electricity usage? Well, if you're thinking a megawatt, you're talking about, on average, about 650 typical homes would use over the course of time a megawatt of electricity. So that, so we're talking about fairly large generation here, right? 650 homes, approximately a megawatt of electricity. Okay, so question 7, what is the total installed global electricity generation capacity? Now I know, unless you just already knew this, that you're not going to have uh, a real clue as to what that might be, but it is given to us in gigawatts. Okay, it's given to us in gigawatts, which is what, 1,000 times greater than the megawatts, and the total installed electricity generation in the world, global, is about 6,000 gigawatts, or 6, trillion. We can look at it either way, but 6,000 gigawatts of total electricity generation in the world. Okay. What is the largest power plant in the world? Well, the largest power plant in the world is a hydro plant, and the largest power plant in the world is called Three Gorges Dam in China, and we will look at that in some detail later about how all that came to be. It's a pretty amazing undertaking. Millions of people were displaced. It actually had some literally global effects in terms of the rotation of the earth, if you can believe that. And we'll talk about that later on in this class. What's the largest power plant in the United States? A lot of times people will answer that as the Hoover Dam, and that's a good guess. But actually, the largest power plant in the United States, again, is a hydroelectric plant, and it's called Grand Coulee. And we'll also look at that in some detail. Okay, now, what's the average price per kilowatt hour for residential electricity in the United States? Okay, so we're going to see that electricity is measured in kilowatts per hour, and that's sort of our basis. Power is measured in watts. Okay, so how much power do we use? It's an energy measurement, and it's given to us in kilowatt hours, and we normally think of that in terms of a cost in cents, actually, thank goodness. And it's about 12 to 13 cents on average in the United States. Is that a good number? It really is. Compared to some places, that's relatively inexpensive. We're lucky in this part of the country near Charlotte. We're home to the largest energy company in the world, Duke Energy. And we live in an area that at one time was full of textile mills and furniture plants, and we have a really good sound electrical infrastructure. And so, we are blessed with abundance of relatively inexpensive electricity. And it's one of the reasons this part of the country has grown so, is that availability. All right, number 11 says approximately what percentage of electricity is lost from the generation to the transmission and distribution. Now you've read, some of the basics about transmission and distribution, and you've kind of got the idea there about what goes on, but about 6% of all the electricity that's generated in the United States is lost getting it from the point to where it was generated to the point to where it was used. Now, 6%, is that a lot? Well, when you look at the numbers that we're talking about in terms of electricity, it's a pretty big number. All right, let's do 2 more and then we'll stop this and start another video. What is the average annual U.S. electricity consumption per household in the United States? Okay, so we want to think about in kilowatt hours, and the average in the U.S. per household is around 10,812 kilowatt hours. Okay, now that kind of backs up, you know, against this thing we talked about in number 6, where we said a megawatt could supply 650 homes. Well, you know, that was a sort of a global number, but you know, when we're talking about average electricity consumption in the United States is around 10,812 kilowatt hours. And if you want to figure out how much that bill would be, right, if we took the high end of this and we said, well, if it's about 13 cents per kilowatt hour, then we could calculate that the average electricity bill is 10,812 times 0.13, and that's going to come out to what? 10,812 times double oops, 13 comes out to around for the year about $1,406. You could think about what you pay for your electricity and see if it's in the ballpark of that. Number 13. This is an interesting question that nobody ever gets right. It says, which state in the United States has the highest electricity consumption per customer? Okay, well, for some reason, and I don't know exactly why that is, maybe we could explore that. Louisiana has the highest electricity consumption per customer in the United States. And which one had the lowest electrical consumption per customer in the United States? Hawaii. Now, I know why Hawaii's electricity consumption per customer is so low. It's because their electricity prices are so high. You think about an island state, isolated, you know, thousands of miles from anyone else. You're not, you know, you're not stringing up cables and transmission, you know, across the Pacific Ocean. So everything has to happen on that island. Everything is self-contained, and because of that, the price is higher in Hawaii than anywhere else. Now, I don't know if Louisiana happens to be the cheapest. Maybe that's something you can look into and find out. Let's do one more. In the U.S., what energy use has the highest percentage of residential electricity usage? In other words, when we look at our total energy bill, which thing in our homes use the most electricity? And here and pretty much across the United States, it's what we call space cooling, keeping our houses cool in the summertime. That is our largest use of energy. All right, let's pause there. Break this video up into 2, and we'll pick up with number 16 in the next video.